Looking to improve your web application security? Probly is reinventing web application security. Probly focuses on the vulnerabilities that matter, eliminates false positives with evidence-based scanning, and provides a simple point-and-shoot solution that is easy to use. Probly's thorough coverage ensures accurate identification of vulnerabilities in any modern web application or API. Improve your web application security processes by visiting securityweekly.com/Probly and start your free trial today. When it comes to web app and API security, the choice is simple. You can choose Fastly's security solution that teams will actually use in full blocking mode, just like 90% of their customers. Or you can stick with costly options that you probably just turn off. You can get Fastly's all-in-one platform that protects apps everywhere they live, however they're built. Or departments can agree to disagree. You can go to securityweekly.com/Fastly to learn more. Or you can just wish you had. DisruptOps helps you find and fix cloud security issues fast. Getting bombarded with irrelevant alerts is frustrating. DisruptOps gives security and DevOps teams prioritized findings and routes relevant alerts to Slack or Microsoft Teams with automated response options that save you time. Finally, security is inside your workflow instead of in your way. Listeners can access the full platform free for 30 days by visiting securityweekly.com/DisruptOps.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 156, and this is the segment where we talk about the news. First, a few announcements, though. Do you want to stay in the week? Do you... Again. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, which we watch while we do these shows, and follow us on our newest live streaming platform, Twitch. Security Weekly is also ecstatic to announce that Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December, the 5th through the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Call for presentations is open now, and early registration is as well. So please get those in. I think you've got a couple more weeks on the CFP before we close that up. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to submit your presentation and register for the early registration price before it expires. All right, on to the news, John. You've got some good stuff here this week.
Yeah, I do. I have to say first, looking forward to hoping to going to the conference down in towards the end of the year at Lake Buena Vista. I feel like, I'm no kids. My wife and I are quite happy where we are, just being the two of us. So the way I think every time I hear someone talk about Lake Buena Vista, I think it's as a conference place. I never think of it as like Disney World and like a place that people go to for fun. It's sort of funny that.
Well, it's me in Vegas, I don't think I've ever gambled. I don't think I've ever spent a dime on gambling. To me, that's conference place. That's conference city.
Yeah. That's where I go to see my friends.
Before we dive into the news, it's interesting. I almost mentioned it in the last segment, but I started rereading Jurassic Park for the first time in probably 15 years, 20 years, something like that. Like I've watched the movie since then, but I haven't reread the book. And it's interesting because they do get into coding quite a bit, and coding practices. And there's this one point where they've got this system that counts all the dinosaurs in the park, and they're pretty sure they have 238 dinosaurs in the park. And they're so sure that the way the system that actually tracks the dinosaurs is actually limited to looking for 238 dinosaurs, because they're so sure that the geneticists have designed these dinosaurs to where they can't reproduce. They're so sure of the bounds that they've set, on their programming, and they even treat, these the genetics as software. Like they're talking about going from 4.3 to version 4.4 on building these actual dinosaurs. It's really interesting read. I mean, I've never thought of Jurassic Park as, best coding practices, a guide for best coding practices, but there's quite a bit in there, and as soon as, like the mathematician is like, hey, what happens if you ask that system for 300 animals? And they're like, but there's not, they can't breed. He's like, just humor me, and of course they do it. And there's like 290 something animals.
It's funny. I don't think I've read the books. I mean, Michael Crichton usually does good stuff. I know I've read some of his other material. Little. I don't want to call it. It's sort of candy, but it's still, they're usually pretty good reads. So it's not surprised he has that in there. But when I think of Jurassic Park, especially the first one, it was a bunch of SGI computers. I actually, at the time, they had playing cards that they were giving out. So I actually still have some of my SGI playing cards.
Nice.
And then the little blonde girl, can't remember her name, holding up the copy of, I think it was Advanced Programming in a Unix Environment. And like me being a nerd back in the 90s, I'm like, I've got that book. But that's my memory with that movie.
Yeah, the girl in the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lex. That's Lex. And this is a Unix system. I know this. That's Lex. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So great read. I'm going through it right now, and yeah, Crichton is notorious for over researching his books, and talking to experts and going really deep into the topics. I think later in his career, a little bit more candy, a little bit more, a little bit less of that. But Jurassic Park goes way into the weeds on some of the stuff, and it's very interesting. It goes into hacking and stuff like that as well. So super interesting.
Let's gives our listeners a bit of a lighter reading besides some of the stuff we're going to talk about. I'll dive into the first article. I don't have this up in our publishing system yet. We're working out a bug there, sort of talking about bugs.
Sure.
But I hinted at this in the last segment, and I actually found the article, so I want to talk about it. From the Register, it's quoting a study from Osterman Research. 81% of developers admit to knowingly releasing applications with vulnerabilities in them. And that sounds shocking, right? But obviously, we're all under deadlines. And probably a lot of these things are fairly low key. I'm guessing probably 20-30% of those are like, hey, you're logging some sort of sensitive info, maybe not a password, but like, something in a log that shouldn't be in there. So it's a vulnerability, but it's still not quite the same as a SQLite on the front side. But I think it's a good stat because it gives us something to talk about within our companies, or even with our open source projects, right? They've gone through and they've quoted a bunch of pretty great people at great companies in the industry, but it comes back to something we've been talking about here for a few weeks now, Adrian. Of just because I know there's a vulnerability in something in my application, I still have to encourage management to realize that it's worthwhile for us to spend time to fix this, and that frequently is that comes down to an expense, basically. So you're asking someone, hey, can we go and spend money on fixing this vulnerability? What's the chance of someone actually finding it? So it's that difference between, some people who are a little less security conscious refer to it as like CVE patching, right? You're patching sort of known vulnerabilities that are published out there versus what's in your own application. But two things. One is for developers out there who might be listening to us. It's not just you. Everyone, we're all doing this. And I'm sure I can say I've probably done this at some point myself in the past. Hopefully I've gone back and patched stuff. But it's a constant, the struggle is real. How do we make sure that we try to minimize the exposure that we're putting out there in applications?
Yeah, and there's an interesting parallel in when you're doing creative work too. It's you become familiar with the concept of perfection is the enemy of done, and it's getting it to a point where it's good enough. And you're going to release stuff without flaws because deadlines or quotas and things like that. So it's and generally, getting to that point where it doesn't have any vulnerabilities just isn't realistic in a lot of cases. So you can't expect people to do it. So it becomes more of a, we see this in a lot of InfoSec where we need some kind of concept of prioritization. We've got to be able to prioritize this stuff, and maybe that's education for developers, like understanding what's okay to leave for fixing later versus, more critical, and it's got to be fixed right away.
And I think it's sort of a good lead back. Yeah, it's a good lead back to talking about what we're talking about with Clint, from the point of view of it's probably going to be easier for me to convince a manager to spend money on making sure we have secure defaults, whether that's in the software which we select, the frameworks we select, or actually, creating those abstraction layers for like the database we talked about. So I'm guessing if I put my manager hat on for a second, I'd rather try to spend money upfront on one thing and sort of get things done right, versus every time a release comes out, have to worry about, okay, what did we do this time and what do I need to care about?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good one. It looks like something that was commissioned by Immersive Labs. And you do have to fill out a form to get that, but looks like it's got some good stuff in it. Maybe worth checking out. And the article, the register article you mentioned, I just dropped in the Discord. And that looks worth checking out as well. It loads an image of a burning house. Yeah. I don't know if it's an epidemic. Everything isn't a pandemic and an epidemic. I don't know about that. That again, going back to that metric, 3% of breaches, the bad guys use vulnerabilities. So epidemic. I mean, in terms
it's a strong word.
Wasting people's time. I mean, a lot of those vulnerabilities are not worth fixing, but regulations will force you to fix them anyway in a lot of those cases. So I think that's one of the big problems in the vulnerability space is finding a way that you can actually tune out the ones that don't matter, where there's just no ROI on spending time on them.
Yeah. And, it's worth saying for a second. I know we've got so much. We're not going to get through all the stories we've got today, but we'll try and get through a lot of them. But it's worth saying on that particular point, and I think even I've said here in previous episodes of like, oh my God, we keep spending all this money on AppSec and like things aren't getting better. It's probably worth looking at it from the other aspect and going, as you said, 3%. If we weren't putting all the efforts into that we do at AppSec, either AppSec or InfoSec or cloud security, all these sort of DevSecOps areas, how bad would things look? So we're probably, we're going to a lot of effort. I know you probably have some interesting thoughts on this, but we've gone to a lot of effort to make things better at a crazy expense. But what would the alternative be?
Right. Yeah, and I've seen crazy stuff like teams spending 70-80% of their time on vulnerability management and patching, repair, fixing bugs, and then for that to be 3% of the problem, I mean, clearly there's got to be a reckoning there, and I think some of it is tooling, the idea that the earlier you fix it, the less expensive it is in terms of time and labor, stuff like that. And then the idea of killing entire classes, moving up to a higher level where you've got a framework underneath that takes care of some no-brainer kind of low-hanging fruit for you, or moving up to the no-code level or something like that, or using, I love the idea of using wrappers and things like that, and just some languages like Go, for example, take entire classes of vulnerabilities off the board. Yeah, so hey, you've at a couple other interesting articles here too. Talk about this ransomware one here. It's more at the philosophical level, but I think this
there's a pattern on some of these articles this week, huh? And it may be I don't know if it's where my mind's coming from or what we're seeing coming out. We're probably still a few weeks from the summer PR ramp up for Hacker Summer Camp, and for those not familiar with the phrase for Black Hat and DEF CON, we get the second sort of wave of articles over the year after the stuff we have in January, Feb for RSA. But this was an interesting one from the point of view of it's a bit of a think piece, but starting off with a title of "Ransomware is not out of control, security teams are." And I think this comes right back to what you're just saying about that. We're putting 70% of our budget into 3% of our issues, and it's not that most companies aren't trying. I mean, some are not, but usually what we're seeing is, well, we're humans, right? So we're, and I know especially engineers, we get so our heads down deep in what we're doing that very seldom do we sort of take a step back and go, oh, that door over there is open. Maybe we should just do that, fix that, instead of worrying about the chain link and the barbed wire around the whole building. I'm up in from with the heat wave we've got going on the West Coast. I'm a few hours north of Seattle today, sort of trying to get some air conditioning and cooling. And I was out driving around this weekend, and I saw a BP refinery, and they had all the security things which we expect people, which we talk about, like CISSP books and stuff like that, right? The concrete barriers inside of a barbed wire fence with another barbed wire fence inside, and you can see the path where they're actually going and monitoring and securing this. And so it was interesting to see someone actually really care about physical security, but they're doing that because they've taken a step back and they've taught and they've done the threat modeling. If we want to bring it back to DevSecOps here a little bit, and the question being, are we in pure InfoSec who aren't thinking about the physical security and actual physical threats? Are we spending our resources and our thoughts on the right areas? So I think that's really the core behind the article. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that from what you've scanned so far, Adrian.
Yeah, so it's interesting in my time, doing pen testing and even as a PCI QSA, one of the things I learned about companies going in and doing audits or doing pen tests and things like that is that a lot of folks only understand the one piece that they deal with. They don't have that big picture view. They don't understand. Certainly they don't understand like the big picture view of security. That's a really difficult thing to get a handle on. But even just how an application works, because a lot of being a PCI QSA and somewhat, scoping a pen test, you ask a lot of questions, and one of the things you have to do when you go through a PCI audit is you have to put together a data flow diagram. The customer has to do that, and it's a really good exercise for threat modeling and for just if you're going to audit the system, you got to understand how it works, right? And how that credit card data, which is like the critical thing in PCI, gets from point A to point Z, and everything that happens to it in between is it protected at each stage here, where it's stored in a database, where it comes in, where it goes out, And after 20 hours, it's depressing to find yourself when it occurs to you, maybe I'm the SME on on this company's main application here or something like that, just because everybody only knows their piece.
Yeah, and I think you led right into what I was going to say, which is a lot of places don't have the overall security person. So maybe that's the point where you bring in a consultant for a few days or a few weeks and say, hey, let us take that step back and actually figure out what's going on. I was just looking through, they've got 3 points in this article. Most common mistakes we're seeing, or at least this particular person or vendor. Number one, no patch strategy. So in other words, how you actually go about triaging these things, which, it's leading right back to what we're talking about. We're sort of repeating ourselves today, but it's good to see other people repeating this as well. Number two, and this, from my ops background, this one is huge to me. No understanding of what normal traffic looks like on a network.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't understand what, I am an engineer at heart. And from that, I'm talking about before I work on a problem or before I fix something, I want to have a baseline. And this is sort of literally the same thing. I mean, how many attacks am I getting on a normal day? What does my traffic look like? How many errors am I usually seeing? Like,
Yeah.
If you don't understand these basic things, then when you see something suspicious, it's like, okay, has that always been there? Or is that, something someone figured out a way in? And then number three is sort of a personal one to me, actually, relying too much on backups. And especially for ransomware, right? For the last 5-ish years when, this thing's been around, if friends ask me, how do I recover for, my buddy's buddy, his machine where he surfs too much porn on, he's got, compromised somehow, he's going to lose all his data and his, everything he's had for the last 10 years. What can he do? I'm like, well, he could have gone back and actually backed shit up in the first place, pardon my French. But I think that argument, which even I made, has fallen apart over the last year or so once the bad guys have realized, hey, we can just sell that data. So it's good to have BCP and disaster recovery and all these type of things, but at the same time, don't just relying on that particular aspect of things. And I think those are there are 3 points which are, none of those are talking about cross-site scripting or shifting left or container security or all these sort of nitty-gritty things we talk about. But they're just as important, right? If not more so.
Yeah, and it's I think it's important, to and I think these easily fall under what we call the basics. So when I train incident responders, that's thing number one is know what your baseline looks like. Because the moment you have an incident, you start digging into logs and you start digging into network traffic. Everything looks crazy. You find a bunch of broken things that have nothing to do with what you're investigating. There's 1,000 rabbit holes you could dive down, and probably will, because you don't know that that's normal for your network, because the first time you've looked at it is during the anomaly. So now everything looks anomalous. You've got no context and no baseline for what that is. And a lot of it is just making sure people have the time to do this kind of stuff, to build these processes. And it's just getting out of that firefighting mindset. And very much this is a psychological mindset of, hey, not only should we put a backup solution in place, but we should pretend that we lost stuff and try to restore it, and test out the integrity of those backups, and that we even know how to use the backup software correctly, and we know how to restore things, because there's a lot of people in process stuff that fall down hard in BCPDR situations and breach situations and stuff like that, just because when the emergency occurs, when the breach or incident occurs, that's the first time they're doing that thing, that function. Yep, but
let's talk about one of the articles.
Not even a security thing, like my comment earlier about having those diagrams. Like that's just an IT thing, like just knowing how your stuff works.
But it's again, it's something. It's so basic, but and the thing is, right? So again, as an engineer, we're going to try and find a tool. Don't go looking for the tool, right? Just grab a paper and a pen or a whiteboard or something, and just start sketching out what does your data flow look like for your application you're working on, right? And you go see some inputs, you go see some outputs, and like, don't worry about what's going on inside. Just think about those two, and like, okay, do I have everything up that I know about on there? And then for those inputs and outputs, what's going on? What could people do? And it's such a simple thing to start with, but a lot of this is once we start communicating with others, or even just communicating with a whiteboard by itself, we start getting other thoughts in our head and start realizing, hey, excuse me, there's a better way to do this. So it doesn't have to be some big, crazy, complex thing.
Yeah. And I think this plays well into one of the articles I have, which is titled, I Know What I Didn't Do Last Summer. And kind of the point here is just being more intentional with projects, with resources, with infrastructure, where, if I set up a POC in our, one of our AWS accounts today, and I get hit by a truck, I leave, whatever happens, how long is that going to run with nobody noticing that it's there? Having some kind of framework life cycle around everything that we build, whether it's a process to for expenses, like a lot of people's expense processes result in a ton of Word documents and Excel documents just floating around in people's emails all over the place, which is probably not ideal. Same thing happens with code. Same thing happens with infrastructure. And there's a lot of stuff that gets abandoned, and it has an impact on billing. It has an impact on security, because obviously nobody's patching that, nobody's updating that, so it's, especially with the cloud, with a lot of the tooling that we have now, so easy to crank something up and forget about it.
It seems like that's something that there should be a standard around. And I'm not aware of one. I mean, at previous companies, I've written, just thinking purely about cloud or IaaS and stuff like that, or cloud services. I've written scripts which go through a Python script, which will go through my stuff and recursively put a tag on everything that's mine that, like, this is used by this person, this is your email address, this is the department they're in. But I've now had to rewrite that at 3 separate places. And that's not, that's just thinking purely about cloud services from like, the Azures and the Amazon. So it seems like that's something there should be an actual structure that there's a standard for, so that every time we go through and do this, remember thinking about the security and CIA triad, it's not just purely about, cost can be a denial of service. It's a resource denial of service and resource usage. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of these security concepts aren't just purely about, oh my God, someone got my PII.
Well, yeah, and there's so many places that you can apply it, and again, that's why I think this goes along with that theme of kind of shifting how we think about the things that we're responsible for, like data, for example. A lot of places don't have data classification standards, and they don't have any kind of life cycle where they say, okay, we can get rid of that now. We don't need that anymore. That data only needs to be stored for 1 year, or, like in some fields they make it easy, because you're legally required to hold something for a certain number of years. But for stuff where there aren't regulations around it, you should still have your own standard that says, okay, we don't need to keep that indefinitely. So maybe then when you actually have a breach, you're at least limiting the damage that's done by getting rid of stuff that you don't need.
Yeah, and that's a good. I was going to say that's a good example, though, right? Because there's lots of startups and probably bigger companies now that's their specialty is classifying data, and I think the ownership issue is simple enough that I don't know of. I might know of one, but I don't know of many companies out there that's their core business is like, let me go through and just do not so much asset discovery, but tracking of ownership. Who owns this thing, or what's going on, or how many people have as part of their employee exit policy, not just disable badge, take their laptop, that type of thing. Go back through and figure out what cloud resources they were using. So we're getting a little outside of AppSec, but it is sort of still DevSecOps. So I think it's related to what we're talking about here. But
this is at the conceptual level. Like there's this app, this great app I used to use that's kind of designed for keeping track of the time that you spend on billable projects. And you can create projects, set your billable rates, called Toggle. And they've got an app that you can put on your phone, you can put on your computer. And the one that you put on your computer, you say, oh, okay, I've started this task for this project. If your computer goes idle and you come back to it, it'll actually say, hey, you went idle. Do you want to keep all this time? Or do you want to keep this timer running? And even on your phone, like if I leave my computer and check my phone will say, if I've got the same app there logged into the same account, it'll say, hey, do you intend for this timer to still be running, or did you just forget to hit stop on it? And I think that's kind of the concept that we need for some of the stuff that we build. Is to build it with an end date in mind. Everything doesn't need to last forever.
Yeah. And I think at one of the previous places, one of those tags which we put on was exactly that. How long are you planning on using this resource? But again, that's something that someone inside the company was smart enough to realize we should be tagging our resources with that. I haven't seen that more recently or previously. And again, like I said, that should be a simple standard, right? That should be this is just a schema which you apply to anything you're doing in the cloud. Super simple. And even if it's not automatically delete after 1 quarter, but just come back and say, hey, are you still using this? Very simple conversation to have, and save us a lot of pain probably.
Yeah. So you've got another story here. I found. I think everybody found pretty interesting that Microsoft signed a rootkit, a couple of rootkits, I think.
Yeah. So I guess,
and this wasn't somebody stealing the signing keys, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this came out over the weekend, so it might be news to some people. I'm trying to get better at. We have this one of the bad things about recording ASW on Monday mornings is when I get off air, I'll find stuff in my inbox. I'm like, damn it, I wish I knew about that 2 hours ago. And this one I caught yesterday. But Yeah, so a vendor who, this is standard process. A vendor out there had a device driver, which, for any device driver on modern operating system, you need the OS vendor usually to sign it, at least for the commercials like Microsoft and Mac. So they submitted a signing request to with no malicious intent at all. They had this driver. They submitted to Microsoft to get signed so it can be released into Windows and be used legitimately. Microsoft said, we'll happily do that for you. And the next thing you know, you've got this driver out there that I believe it had multiple rootkits in it, not just one. I'm seeing a mixture. We'll call it one for now. One's bad enough, right? But okay, so everyone's realized the mistake, and this probably happened, I'm guessing, a few weeks ago, and we're just hearing about it now. The vendor went back through, they cleaned stuff up, they submitted a new request, Microsoft signed it, that went out. But step back a second and go, hey, hang on. What happened there? What was missed? And I'm sure there's folks at Microsoft are scrambling on this now, or they have scrambled, and it's not going to happen again. But it's something to think through, that even something coming from a large vendor, or in this case, multiple large vendors, we need to be careful about what we're doing. Everyone makes mistakes. But then, with our thinking about our own little neck of the woods, how would we try to ensure this doesn't happen in our company? It's funny. I usually don't think of one real quick one on there. I usually don't think of antivirus scans on my. So in general, in the past, when people have mentioned like antivirus scans on containers, I'm like, why would you do that? That's sort of dumb. But obviously, there's uses for it here in some cases. This wasn't a container, but the point being, there's if you're releasing something publicly, it's probably a good idea to check for those basics, like, is there a known malware in the damn thing? So it was something else to add to your CI process, I guess, at the end of the day.
Right. It's a tough problem. And I think you have this problem at two levels. So you've got, Microsoft has this problem and anybody that has an app store or a container registry, or anything where people are getting code from them, whether it's, you're getting a package from GitHub or, you're pulling a container from a container registry, or getting something from an app store, there's got to be some kind of hygiene process that goes through that and make sure that there's not anything malicious in there. And I think we've seen anybody that's ever had an app store or repository like that has struggled with this, and there's been stories in the news of if it's not somebody actually maliciously getting something in there, it'd be a researcher seeing what they can get away with, right? And then you have this problem at the enterprise level, and I think it's a lot more difficult there. Microsoft will solve this problem. They'll figure this out. But the fact that they had this problem means that you also have to prepare for this at the enterprise level. What if the stuff that you're pulling from NPM is suddenly malicious? Like it's the same package that you've always grabbed, but whoever maintained that package either lost access to it or maybe even gave away or turned over access to it to somebody that they thought was going to maintain that open source project for them or that library for them, and maybe had malicious intent, I think it's a lot harder to do at that level to detect those kinds of software supply chain attacks. When you've got containers coming from here and libraries coming from there, and if you think about the patching process, the amount of code that comes in from the outside all day long, every day, it's a lot. Yeah.
And I think one of the core things I hope listeners of the show sort of take away of this or any Security Weekly show or really any podcast is it becomes a thought experiment while you're listening to this in the car or, you're working out or you're, weeding or whatever you listen to a podcast. Is that, it's a thought process or a thought experiment of not just, what am I learning that I can improve in the future, but hey, I'm due to go back and review some of the things that we're doing. We think we've got best practices in place. Best practices change over time, right? So how can I improve what I've already got going on? Do I have any open holes? In this case, do I need to add antivirus to my build chain? So that's sort of one of the takeaways I hope people get from stuff like this.
And that's a tough thing, is antivirus isn't going to catch a lot of this kind of stuff. Like, it's trickier. It's looking for, behaviors, where those network connections reaching out to. And we actually talked about this with one of our, I think it was a sponsored segment. I'm trying to remember who it was. But they were talking about vendors actually releasing specifications for their software and what it should do. So not just an SBOM, but like here's the host names that it should be reaching out to, the domain names or the IP addresses. Here's what to expect behavior-wise from this piece of software, and then giving it to you in JSON or some kind of format that you can easily load into something. Because at the scale we're talking about, it's got to be at least partially automated, right?
Yeah, if you think of that off air, who that was or which episode, let me know. One of the things I was working on and still am is with CNCF is the concept of a security nutrition label. So it's really sort of that, but how do you obviously have a JSON format, but think about like a security label a nutrition label we have on packaged foods. How can I quickly tell, hey, this should be talking out on the network, or this should be doing something as root, or some of those high-level concepts that let people make a go, no-go if they should be using the software package or what they should be expecting from it. So it'd be cool to see what those guys are doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Searching. I'll have to let you know on that. I'm pretty sure it was on, I want to say it was on either Enterprise Security Weekly or Business Security Weekly. But yeah, definitely a cool idea. And I think we're going to have to get to that point because it's just too difficult to do otherwise. I think the vendor was Extra Hop, though, that is proposing. They're trying to be an example of that and do that themselves, and proposing that others do that as well. Basically saying, the SBOM, the nutrition label, isn't quite enough. We've got to go a little bit beyond that, to say, hey, our software shouldn't be reaching out to China. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. I like that a lot of the stories are kind of, more deep thinks on the level of, here's how you should be looking at security. Here's how you should be thinking about it. I love that kind of stuff because it's, instead of handing you a fish, it's, we're more teaching you how to fish. Think like a security person. All right. Thank you very much, John. And Mike Shima will be back with you next week. And that's it for
Thanks for hosting. Did a great job.
Security Week. Yeah. Thank you.